What if I told you that the financial education most people trust is not designed to make you rich, but to make you predictable? And what if the reason so many hardworking, educated people still struggle with money is not because they are lazy or bad with finances, but because they were taught only a small and controlled version of how money actually works? Think about this for a moment. From a young age, most people are taught the same financial advice: study hard, get a stable job, save part of your income, avoid debt, spend wisely, maybe invest a little for retirement if you can. On the surface, this sounds responsible, safe, even smart. But here is the strange part. If this is everything you need to be financially successful, then why does financial stress still exist for the majority of people who follow it? Why do so many people who did everything right still feel like they are stuck in the same cycle for years, sometimes even decades? They earn money, they pay bills, they try to save something. Then the next month starts, and the cycle repeats again. And while they are doing everything they were told to do, a completely different group of people seems to be playing a different game altogether, not necessarily working harder, not always having higher education, but somehow building wealth faster, owning assets, and creating financial freedom that looks almost disconnected from the traditional path. So what is the difference? It is not just income. It is not just intelligence. And it is definitely not just discipline. The difference is understanding how money actually moves in the real world versus how it is explained in traditional financial education. Because here is the uncomfortable truth most people never hear clearly. The system of financial education most people receive is heavily focused on behavior control, not wealth creation. It teaches you how to manage limited money well, but not how to expand money into systems that grow beyond your time and effort. It teaches you how to be financially safe, but not necessarily how to be financially free, and that creates a very specific outcome: a large population of people who are responsible with money, but still dependent on active work for survival. People who are financially aware, but not financially powerful. People who understand budgeting and saving, but have never been properly exposed to concepts like leverage, ownership, cash flow systems, and asset expansion in a practical way. So they assume they are learning everything they need to know. But in reality, they are only learning the rules of survival inside the system, not the rules of wealth creation outside of it. And that raises a very important question. If financial education is truly meant to prepare people for financial success, why does it stop right before teaching how wealth is actually built at scale? That is exactly what we are going to uncover today. The biggest problem with financial education is not that it is completely wrong. It is that it is incomplete in a way that quietly shapes how people think about money for their entire lives. Most people believe that financial education means learning how to be good with money, so they focus on budgeting, saving, cutting expenses, and avoiding debt. These are useful skills, but they are not the full picture of wealth building. The misunderstanding starts when people assume that if they simply follow these rules long enough, financial freedom will naturally follow. But in reality, many people follow these rules for years and still never reach financial independence. So what is going wrong? The issue is that traditional financial education trains people to think in terms of limitation instead of expansion. For example, most people are taught to ask questions like, how can I reduce my spending? How can I save more from my salary? Or, how can I avoid financial risk? These are defensive questions. They help you protect money, but they do not help you grow money. Meanwhile, the most financially successful people are asking completely different questions. They are asking, how can I increase my income streams? How can I acquire assets that generate cash flow? And how can I use leverage to scale my financial position? This is a completely different mindset, and because traditional education rarely emphasizes this difference, most people grow up without ever realizing that two entirely different financial strategies even exist. One strategy is focused on working within limits. The other is focused on expanding beyond limits. Another major misunderstanding is the belief that saving money is the same as building wealth. Saving money is important. It gives stability and protection, but saving alone does not create financial growth. If your income depends on your job, then your savings are limited by how much you can earn over time. You can only save a portion of what you make, and what you make is tied to your time and energy. This creates a ceiling that most people never notice. They assume they just need to save longer or earn slightly more. But the structure of their financial life remains the same. Earn, spend, save a little, repeat. Over time, this cycle feels normal, even safe, but it does not lead to independence for most people. Instead, it leads to long-term dependence on active income, and this is where the deeper issue appears. Financial education often does not clearly teach the difference between income that requires your time and income that does not. It rarely explains how wealth is built through ownership of assets, systems, or investments that generate returns independently of daily labor. So people end up believing that the only reliable path to financial stability is working more years, saving more carefully, and retiring later. But this path is slow, fragile, and heavily dependent on external conditions like job stability, inflation, and lifestyle changes. So the real problem is not effort. People are trying. The real problem is direction. They are working hard inside a framework that was never designed to teach wealth creation at scale. And until that framework is questioned, most people will continue doing the right things, but for the wrong outcome. To understand the truth about financial education, you first need to understand how wealth actually works in the real world, not how it is usually described in classrooms or basic money advice, because wealth is not built through one single action like saving money or getting a higher salary. Wealth is built through a structure, a system of financial movement that most people are never clearly taught. At the most basic level, every person's financial life is built on four elements: income, expenses, assets, and liabilities. Income is the money you earn from work or business. Expenses are the money you spend to live your life. Assets are things that put money into your pocket. Liabilities are things that take money out of your pocket. Most traditional financial education stops at income and expenses. It teaches you how to increase income a little and reduce expenses a little. That is where most advice ends. But wealth creation starts when you move your focus to assets and liabilities. This is the part that changes everything. Because if you only focus on income and expenses, your financial life becomes a balancing act. You earn money, you spend money, and you try to keep a small portion left over. That leftover becomes your savings. But savings alone do not create new income. They only store value temporarily. Now here is the key shift that most people are never taught clearly. Wealthy people do not primarily focus on saving more from income. They focus on converting income into assets that generate more income. This is a completely different way of thinking. For example, imagine two people earn the same salary increase. One person upgrades their lifestyle immediately. A better phone, better car, more comfort. Their expenses rise with their income. The other person takes that same increase and asks a different question. How can I use this extra money to create something that pays me back in the future? That difference in thinking leads to two completely different financial paths over time. Another important concept is leverage. Leverage means using external resources to increase your financial output. This can be borrowed capital, other people's time, or scalable systems like businesses or investments. Without leverage, your income is tied directly to your time. You work more hours. You earn more money, but there is a limit to both. With leverage, your financial results are no longer strictly tied to your personal effort. A single decision or asset can continue generating returns even when you are not actively working. This is why two people with similar education and intelligence can end up in very different financial situations. One remains in a linear system, where effort equals income. The other moves into a compounding system where assets and leverage generate income over time. And this is where the real gap in financial education appears. It does not clearly teach people how to transition from earning income through time to building income through ownership. So most people grow up mastering the basics of money management, but never learning the deeper structure of wealth creation, and as a result, they spend their lives optimizing survival instead of building systems that create freedom. To really understand how financial education differs from real-world wealth building, we need to look at how money actually works for people who reach high levels of wealth, not in theory, but in practice. Because once you observe real financial behavior at scale, you start noticing a pattern that is very different from what most traditional financial education teaches. Let's start with a simple but powerful observation. Wealthy individuals rarely build their financial lives around saving money alone. Instead, They build around ownership of assets that grow in value or generate cash flow. Take real estate investors as an example. Most beginners think real estate investing means saving enough money, buying a property, and hoping it increases in value over time. But experienced investors approach it differently. They focus on leverage. Instead of waiting to accumulate the full price of a property in cash, they often use borrowed capital from banks or financial institutions. This allows them to control a large asset with a relatively small initial investment. Once the property is acquired, it can generate rental income while also potentially increasing in value over time. That rental income helps pay down the loan, while the asset itself continues to grow. This creates a system where the investor is not just saving money, they are building a self-reinforcing financial structure. Now compare this with someone following traditional financial education only. That person is typically focused on saving consistently, avoiding debt completely, and waiting for long-term retirement funds to grow slowly over decades. Both approaches require discipline, both require patience, but only one approach uses external capital and assets to accelerate growth. Another example can be seen in business ownership and equity-based wealth. Many successful entrepreneurs do not rely on salary as their primary source of wealth. Instead, they focus on building or owning businesses that can scale beyond their personal time. When a business grows, its value increases. The owner benefits not only from income but also from equity appreciation. In many cases, owners reinvest profits back into the business or use financial tools to expand operations further instead of extracting everything as personal income. This allows wealth to compound at a much faster rate compared to saving alone. Even in large public companies, founders and major stakeholders often hold significant equity instead of liquidating everything into cash. Their wealth is tied to ownership, not just earnings. This is why figures like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are often discussed in financial conversations. Their wealth is largely based on ownership stakes in companies that grow in value over time, not traditional salary income. It is not about idolizing individuals. It is about understanding the structure behind their wealth. Their financial outcomes are not driven primarily by saving money or cutting expenses. They are driven by ownership, leverage, and long-term asset growth. Now compare that structure to what most people learn in traditional financial education. Budget carefully, save consistently, avoid debt, invest a small amount when possible. These are safe principles, but they do not naturally lead to asset accumulation at scale. So the real-world example becomes very clear. There are two financial systems operating at the same time. One system teaches you how to manage money safely. The other system teaches you how to multiply money through ownership and leverage. And the difference between those systems is what separates financial stability from financial freedom. So after understanding how financial education works, where it falls short, and how wealth is actually built in the real world, the most important question becomes this: what should you actually take away from all of this? Because the goal is not to reject financial education completely. Budgeting, saving, and controlling expenses are still important. Without them, financial life becomes unstable very quickly. But the lesson is that these are only the foundation, not the full structure. Real financial education begins when you start thinking beyond survival and start thinking in systems. The first lesson is simple but powerful. Earning money is not the same as building wealth. Earning money is active. You exchange time and effort for income. It stops when you stop working. Wealth building is different. It is about creating or owning things that continue producing value even when your time is not directly involved. That is the shift most people never make consciously. They stay in the earning phase their entire lives and assume that increasing income alone will eventually lead to freedom. The second lesson is about saving. Saving money is important, but saving is not a wealth strategy. By itself, saving protects you. It gives you security and stability. But it does not multiply your financial position in a meaningful way over long periods of time. If saving alone created wealth, then the most disciplined savers in the world would automatically become financially free. But that is not what we see in reality. The third lesson is about debt, and this is where most traditional advice becomes too simplistic. Debt is often taught as something dangerous that must be avoided at all costs. But in the real world, debt can function as a tool. When used irresponsibly, it creates financial pressure, but when used strategically, it becomes leverage that allows people to control assets and scale faster than they could with savings alone.